Your Excellency, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Your Excellencies, invited guests, it's my pleasure to present to you today what we've done so far in terms of infrastructure development. But my presentation will start looking back a little bit on Ethiopia's ambition. Ethiopia's ambition has always been expressed through building at a national scale. For a millennia, Ethiopians have built at the boundary of what's possible, not incrementally. In fact, one could argue Ethiopia's history is a story of infrastructure development, not incrementally, but at scale, with national purpose from the highlands to the horizon, from north to south, from west to east, Ethiopians have built. From the 16th to the 17th century, the Islamic architecture heritage that we cherish until today, the Gondar and Fasilides royal enclosures, and the 20th century infrastructure development of rail and, of course, Ethiopian Airlines that was born 80 years ago. And the 21st century marble, our crown jewel, the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, that stand not as merely a power project, but a statement that Ethiopia still seeks to build at a continental stage. But this is also a challenge. This is an ancestral challenge. Our forefathers have left us this assignment. This is what we've built. What have you built? It's a question that we must answer today. If we look at the past 89 years, the monarchy, Derg, and EPRDF, all have attempted and tried to build using different development models, different actors, different financiers, and different partners. But there is always that enduring challenge, turning an infrastructure expansion into a lasting national productivity and resilience. Let's look at these different leaders and regimes. The monarchy, visible modernization, but inclusion remained narrow. What was the modernization logic? Investment drove diversification across manufacturing, service, roads, aviation, and power. The financing model, it was quite mixed. The imperial state invested, Western partners contributed, multilateral lenders provided support. In fact, the World Bank, when it was first established, the first support it gave was for Ethiopia power development. And then it was a quasi-state as well. Private sector participation was there. The distributional result, growth concentrated in Addis, and Addis narrow corridor, leaving rural Ethiopia outside the benefits of what infrastructure can do to change Ethiopians' life. The lesson, the monarchy showed modernization without inclusion leaves transformation incomplete. The Derg scale delivered growth, but debt and state concentration deepened fiscal risk. Modernization logic was heavy industry. Roads were built, administration expansion was there. The financing model, investment heavily relied on the state and state-owned enterprises. There was no space for the private sector. The distribution result, of course, the road network expanded significantly from 9,200 to 19,000 kilometers, but civil war, famine, and repression all collapsed because there was no incentive. The lesson, the Derg showed that scale without discipline rarely delivers a lasting development. And EPRDF, since 1991 to 2018. State expansion in scale, but coercion also showed off. Modernization logic of EPRDF, agriculture, development, led industrialization, positioned road, power, universities, industrial parks, the pillars of structural transformation. But the financing model is unique and something that requires a little bit depth analysis. Public borrowing, most significantly led by state-owned enterprises, enabled rapid expansion, but the debt exposure also expanded equally, leaving a huge amount of risk. The distribution result, growth accelerated in road, private sector participation was limited, but it was there. But in total, it was a jobless growth. The lesson, EPRDF showed that scale without sequencing, financing, and without the involvement of private sector debt, it rarely lasts. Let's look at a few examples of this era. The sugar sector. The sugar sector is one of the most ambitious infrastructure development in the past 25 years in this country. Money was spent. Government support was there. But look at the result. The Kuraz projects, 65 billion birr, $1.1 billion was spent. They're yet incomplete. External debt for similar sugar sector involvement, 144 billion, which is 2.1 billion USD external debt carried by the sugar company. It didn't only limit the exposure to the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia. It didn't only limit it to the sugar company. It also expanded to the banking sector, putting the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia into a significant amount of pressure, $110 billion worth of debt that mounted. 83% of the project of Kuraz won, yet incomplete. 42 billion birr still required to complete Wolkait Sugar Factory. It was a marvelous idea to develop a sugar state. It was a strategic bet, but a failed leadership changed it to a strategic gamble that we had to pay until today. University expansion, another noble idea, but expanding universities for the sake of building an empty infrastructure. The pipeline wasn't there, the talent wasn't there. It's just a budgetary headache, a physical concern. Rail ambition. Building rail for a vast country like Ethiopia is a wonderful infrastructure idea. However, sequencing commercial logic needs to govern this type of decision. Without properly commercializing Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, where the government borrowed over $5 billion to start another project on a commercial loan, over $2.2 billion, that's where the departure happens. It's not about infrastructure. If it is about infrastructure, if it is about building, then you do sequencing. Regional airport expansion. Every region, everywhere, deserves an airport expansion project. But there has to be equity. There has to be a commercial sense. 3-4 airports with very close proximity, while commercial centers that could drive economic growth, lacking airports until today, that is where the departure is. That is where the disconnect is between infrastructure development and the ambition to make sure this infrastructure that we develop have a commercial mindset and a commercial rationale. The energy ambition. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is something every Ethiopian and Africa is proud that we've built. But before you complete GERD, before you complete the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, you don't start Koisha without securing the financing aspect of it. Without sequencing, the discipline of sequencing, the financing realism, and the tariff adjustment that's required. The road infrastructure expanded fast, but prioritization wasn't there. Some areas, it was just a political commitment rather than an economic, commercial rationale. These are the projects that laid into a huge debt burden, uncompleted projects that required the reform government to grab all of this project, to complete the ones that are not completed, to suspend the ones that needs to be suspended, to fund the ones that are a priority and will change the lives of Ethiopians. So what has been done by the reform government? The state completely shifted to a disciplined enabler of growth with a clarity of thought. There is no confusion. Infrastructure is important. There is a clarity of thought as to the importance of infrastructure. But with what type of philosophy? Maddamer. With the Maddamer philosophy that reframed growth as a synergy. It's not an isolated incident, but it's a synergy without putting in ideology at the center of it. But what works, what enables, what delivers at the center of it. The financing model, very simple, just one line. A diverse source with a focus on a financing fit. And as Dr. Yob explained earlier, all of this achievement that my colleagues have shown you was possible with zero commercial financing. I used to work at the Ministry of Finance. I know. Zero commercial financing. The distribution result, all the sectors, telecom, agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, all of them collectively delivering. The reform era begins to move toward a state-enabled, multi-sector coalition-based development rather than stuck in one single ideology. Two sectors that I want to show. Dr. Mandefro has already talked about agriculture. Miriam has already talked about telecom. But these are important points that I really wanted to show you again because a smart policy choice can raise output, revenue, and productivity at the same time. We've not abandoned the importance of agriculture. We doubled down on it with the introduction of smart policy, as Dr. Mandefro talked about. We've not shackled ourselves with an arcane policy on telecom. In fact, it was liberalized. The company was enabled to grow, and the results are visible. Just this year, this fiscal year, the past 8 months, Ethio Telecom's revenue has surpassed 121 billion Ethiopian birr. A marvelous achievement, a smart policy. These are the results. The reform government's project footprint. We can pick so many different projects and show you on this screen. The Grand Renaissance Dam, the Addis Ababa Corridor Project, the Toyo Solar Manufacturing Plant, all of this are different in items, different in terms of their impact, but the projects that we've worked on in the past 8 years and what this reform government has delivered span from irrigation, flood resilience, urban renewal, industrial energy, research, transport, and tourism, and so on and so forth. So, what does this historical analysis, the current reform government, what does it inform us? Scale without discipline creates fragility. Infrastructure without productivity stalls. Financing without fit misallocates capital. Project without institutions cannot endure. So these lessons demand a governing framework. And this is what I'm going to attempt to show you today. What are the principles that we can identify from the last 8 years of the reform government? I'll walk you through these 8 principles one by one. The first is continuity. Protect what works across political transitions, across time. We don't need to go anywhere else to know how continuity can deliver. Just look at Ethiopian Airlines. 80 years, different governments, different ideology, different turbulent times. but there was a continuity. If it works, then continue with it. But it has to be also selective. Keep working institutions, investments, and delivery systems, and discard failed programs with evidence when there is no evidence to support them. And rupture of a system, a process that works, is very costly. So the taste here, the governing taste to continue with what or to abandon it should be evidence, not ideology. So the first principle of this government when it comes to infrastructure is continuity. Maintain, keep, double down on what works. Second, architecture. Design for multi-sector, multi-actor, multi-beneficiary program. If your program is singular, it will fail. Regardless of the actor, regardless of the region, regardless of the ambition, if you do not bring and work towards a multi-sector, multi-actor beneficiaries, it would fail. So from the sector lens, it needs to cut across ministries, regions, and others. From the actors lens, include actors beyond the state. And from the beneficiaries lens, ask who gains, who bears the risk, and who is left out. And your infrastructure project will last for long. And the third principle is delivery. Treat public-people partnership as a delivery tool, not a slogan. If it were not for public-people partnership, I don't think it would be possible to plant 48 billion seedlings in the past 7 years. If it were not for public-private partnership, I don't think it would be possible to do 20 national tourism projects across the country. So treat public-people, public-private partnership as a true delivery models. And it also helps, this model also helps to make the ownership part of the asset. When I'm part of the project, when I'm the one who planted one seedling, then I would cherish it as my own. It also cuts delivery costs without shrinking ambition. 48 billion can only be done with the participation of everyone. And it would also allow it to be a national scale feasible. So delivery is a very important principle. Fourth is sequencing. Order investment decision to compound value. Focus on the ones that have a productive component, a revenue-generating projects. Every project has its own unique characteristics. Every investment has its own unique characteristics. But the most important thing is sequencing. If you bring first data-driven projects that will drain the system, you tend to fail in terms of achieving your next projects. If you bet on date, and if you're going to invest on projects with date, you might as well invest on projects that have a strong revenue generation capacity. Then that revenue generation capacity will help you to build the next part of your infrastructure projects. So sequencing is very important. What we've learned, we started from Unity Park. Start small. Connect the dots. You go to Ntato. And learn not just see from Arat Kilo all the way to Meskel Square. Abrahot, Friendship Park, and you get to Meskel Square. And then you scale it fast. Now it's a corridor development. Not only in Addis, but across the country. Jimma, Jijiga, Dredoa, Harar, Bahar Dar, Dase, everywhere. Sequencing is very important. Start small, connect the dots, learn and adjust, and scale it fast. That is the principle we govern infrastructure development in Ethiopia today. Fifth, design discipline. The design discipline is very important. Define the end before construction begins. Know your moon, as they say. Know your moon. Going to saying I'll go to the moon is not enough. There are 250 confirmed moons in the solar system. So know your moon. Just saying I'll go to the moon is not sufficient. So define the end before construction begins. What does this mean? Most of the time, project cost overruns and delays are rarely just technical failures. They're usually a design and governance failure. So what do you need to ask? Quantify what will deliver, the project, what it will deliver. Ask what it will cost to finish, and inquire how will it operate, this project, this infrastructure. And then finally decide what counts as a success, because you cannot keep moving the goalpost. If success is 100 kilometers, if a success is finishing the project in 30 days, if a success is completing the project with only the defined amount of budget that's given to it, define your success. The fifth principle is the design discipline, which is the most important and critical component of how we govern, we design, we implement infrastructure projects in Ethiopia today. 6 is anchor investments in a very limited resource of the government. You cannot really chase every investor. You have to be strategic. You have to identify the anchor investors, the ones with a multiplying impact and effect. So there are 3 steps that we use. First, choose the sector. Identify the sectors where you need the anchors. You need to know that first. Second, support the anchor investors until commitments become real. Work with them. Share the risk with them. Identify the uncertainties in their investment and convert it into risk. Because investors, one thing that they do not like is uncertainty. They love risk. Because there is a reward to risk. Third, let anchor success pull the next wave of investors. So this is the 6th principle. This is how we target investors to come in and to participate in Ethiopia. The 7th principle, which for me is the most important principle, the most important infrastructure discipline this government has put in place, is financing discipline. Match the capital type to the asset type. When Dr. Eyob talked about zero commercial financing, this is because there is a financing discipline. You have to match financing to the right type of project. If it is a public good, where there is no revenue coming in from the transaction, then it's a budgetary financing. If it is a revenue generating asset, of course, a debt could support it. If it is a commercial sector endeavor, private capital could support it. You mismatch this structure of financing, you'll end up with a huge amount of debt burden in your books. The core rule is very simple. Match money source to the asset type. A very simple principle. Match money source to the asset type. If you look at all the projects that have failed, that are struggling, that I have mentioned earlier, at the core of it, at the heart of it, was a financing mismatch. So the way we govern projects, the way we finance projects, is first identify what project, and based on that, we find a financing match for it. When we're ambitious and wanted to invest on a $3 billion fertilizer plant, we identified the financing for it, a private sector participant. We put in our equity, the amount that we can manage, and this is a financing fit that allows a project to succeed and to expand. And the final principle is destination. Okay, what does it all mean? In order to all this infrastructure project, ultimately, need to allow the state assets to generate or to last into generational wealth. And Ethiopian Investment Holding, the reason why it's created is to bring especially investments, projects, and act as enabler. It's an institutional vehicle that is managed professionally. It has an investor logic. It has a clear mandate. And it's also a response to the national question. It's an answer to the national question that if you want investments and projects to expand, then create a strong institutional investment vehicle that allow investments to succeed. So far, this is the result. Ethiopian Investment Holding has been established now 4.5 years. So far, our total assets have reached 8.2 trillion, a huge asset base, a huge balance sheet that allows us to attract private sector participants, 6.9 trillion birr in total revenue, 715 billion birr tax contribution, $52 billion foreign currency in the past 4.5 years, and 3.9 billion USD investment that we've attracted. So this is the destination. So looking forward, what is the next challenge? What are we aiming to do in terms of infrastructure investment and development in Ethiopia? These are the 5 sectors that will focus, but not bounded and limited in Ethiopia, but outward-looking, forward-looking. So one is clean energy, and second is construction. Third is digital expansion. A connected Africa is what we wanted to see. Fourth is air, rail, and sea, creating regional backbones. And fifth is green technology, learning from what we've done so far and enabling our companies to expand across the various countries in the continent. So what's the ultimate destination and what's the ultimate achievement? What's the end point? I really want to borrow from physics and talk about escape velocity. For any object to leave this beautiful earth, it will require a significant amount of energy. And developmental economists use this to explain for a country like ourselves, for a country that's still growing, in order to move away from a downward pressure, it requires a significant amount of energy. The same way you see the shuttle getting out of the gravitational pull, when it gets to the threshold, passing the gravitational pull into the outer space, the energy that it requires to grow is very small. The same way, what we're doing, all the investments that we're doing, all the infrastructure that we've talked about today, that is our escape velocity. Those are infrastructure projects that are going to pull us out from where we are and get into the threshold. And in that threshold, where you have a disciplined macro reform, agriculture responsive to our natural endowment, forward-looking digital connectivity, mining as a strategic pillar that broadens beneficiaries, urban development that turns cities into a productive engines of growth, and infrastructure designed, financed, and that delivers with intent is our escape velocity to achieve the elusive quest of growth. And if our forefathers were to come back and ask us, what have you done today? And we'll be able to tell them, we are the generation that tamed the Nile. Thank you.